Hello, this is Mike Fitz, your resident naturalist with explore.org. And it's Bald Eagle Week on explore.org, a celebration of bald eagles, an opportunity to learn more about their lives, and to highlight the organizations and individuals that work to conserve bald eagles in the wild. Across much of North America right now, bald eagles are nesting and raising their chicks. However, not long ago, the survival of bald eagles as a species really was in question. Through the work of dedicated conservationists and changing values in our society, these birds have the opportunity to thrive once again. And to help me explore the world of bald eagles, I have a few special guest co-hosts with me. I have John Howe and Amy Reese from the Raptor Resource Institute, and Peter Sharp, a research ecologist with the Institute for Wildlife Studies. So I'd like to thank them for joining me for this live chat. During Eagle Week on explore.org, explore.org is hosting a fundraising campaign for these organizations. And if you want to help these organizations, you can purchase a t-shirt. Explore.org will match the proceeds from those t-shirt sales and donate that money to these organizations up to $25,000. So you can double your money helping these organizations by going to bonfire.com/baldeagleweek. And again, explore.org will be matching those proceeds up to $25,000. And I think several $1,000s have already been raised. So thank you to everybody who's already participated in that. You know, during the chat today, I'm going to be asking my panel of experts a series of questions about bald eagles, and we're certainly going to be talking about the conservation history of the eagles and maybe what people can do today to help these national symbols that we find increasingly in increasing numbers around the United States. And I think that's quite wonderful. Because I can remember a time, I'm not going to necessarily say how old I am, but I can remember a time where eagles were extremely rare where I grew up. And, you heard people talking about them, you read about them in textbooks. But I honestly, I don't think I saw a bald eagle in the wild probably till I was 18 years old or so. So now they're becoming increasingly common. We have them nesting across much of North America, and it's wonderful to see this success story happening. But John and Amy, I wanted to ask you first just a little bit about the basics of an eagle. If you could introduce them to our audience. How big do they get? Their approximate wingspan, how old they might live.
I'm really, really bad on size questions, so I have to apologize for that. Having said that, I believe the oldest known wild eagle was 39 years old when it was hit and killed by a car. So I don't know what the average lifespan would be in the wild, but they can get fairly old.
Yeah, and just basically ballpark. I mean, it's interesting watching these nests because you watch the bird cam and the nest, and it looks like the eagle's fairly small compared to the nest. But Peter, you can chime in on size of nests that you guys watch. But nests typically anywhere between 8 and the north nest in Decorah that we had, one side was almost 11 plus feet in diameter. So the eagles look pretty small inside there, but about a 3 foot tall eagle, that's about the average size, females being about 30% larger, and the wingspan in the 8 to 9 foot range.
Yeah, some of our nests, most of our nests are not in trees, so they're on rock pinnacles, and some of those just expand out. Like you said, I can lay down in one of our nests with my hands over my head and not touch both sides. So they can get pretty large, but then you get some of the newer nests that may only be 4 or 5 feet across, and then the eagles do look huge, but they're, it's all relative.
And for weights, male lower in that, around 8-pound range, and then females up into about that 13-pound range. I think that's and that's going to vary across the North American continent, right? We're going to have smaller eagles down in Florida and the southern coastal areas, and I'm not as familiar with the West Coast, but that's going to vary based on region also.
Right, and in general, they tend to get larger the further north you go, but with all the restoration work that's been done, a lot of the eagles in the lower 48 have come from Alaska, so it's all been mixed over the last 30 to 40 years.
And Peter, you mentioned something interesting about a lot of the nests in your area being on the ground, and maybe I should add and give our panelists here an opportunity to talk about where you do your primary work, for example, because you're not in the same area of the country, right? So yeah, if Peter, if you want to kind of introduce your study area, and then we'll move on to John and Amy.
All right, I work on the California Channel Islands, which are islands about 20 to 60 miles off the coast of Southern California. And we've been restoring eagles out here since 1980. And there aren't a lot of large trees on the islands. So in a lot of cases, the birds will find either ledges on cliffs or rock pinnacles to place their nests. The only predators, mammalian predators out here are island foxes, and the eagles outweigh them at least 2 to 1. So we don't have a lot of potential predation pressure on our birds, so they can nest on the rock pinnacles. And we've actually had some literally just put some sticks in a field and lay eggs and successfully raise chicks just on a flat field. So we have a different environment than most of the eagle areas.
And
so
go ahead, yeah, John and Amy, please.
Yeah, so in the Iowa area, which is where our 2 main broadcast nests are here that we've been monitoring, we're talking 60, 70, 80 feet up in a tree. And the 2 nests that we're working with right now are cottonwood and fish hatchery nest, and then a white oak in the Decorah North nest. We also have eagle nest that we monitor with Excel Energy out in Colorado, and that's, I believe, up in a cottonwood tree too.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting to see the composition, the difference in composition between the nests. You know, one of the things that's interesting to me about bald eagles is how varied their behavior can be. In my experience of wild peregrine falcons, they don't vary a whole lot, whereas eagles, they build big nests, they build small nests, they build on the ground, they build in trees, they build out of whatever is available, and they really take advantage of the surrounding area, which is just fascinating to me.
So it seems like perhaps the eagles will build nests in trees when they're available, but if they find an area with suitable habitat that they may not have ground nesting or predators on the ground, excuse me, that might threaten their nesting productivity, then they'll take that opportunity to nest on the ground. Is that sort of a correct interpretation, Peter?
Yeah, I think so. It's, you know, most of the big trees around here are of the non-native eucalyptus. We have had a couple nests up in eucalyptus trees, but they're generally don't have a real good structure to support large nests. We have some in some native oaks, and sometimes we'll just have a bird, it's nesting in a 6-foot tall tree, but on the side of a cliff. So they feel like they're high up, but they're just in a little bush sometimes.
Yeah, I was recently reading an article about bald eagles nesting on the beach on some barrier islands off of the coast of Virginia. So that was quite fascinating. Something that I was previously not aware of. I guess a famous line from Jurassic Park: "Life finds a way."
One thing that's really interesting here along the Mississippi River and the flyway there, and especially this time of year when there's not leaves and vegetation to block it, you can look out in the river floodplain and you'll see varying degrees of trees with a V-shaped nest in it, and some are just more flat and dish and saucer shaped, and some are really steep and 2 branches of a tree going up. But they're really evident. It's neat to travel up and down the river and look out into the river floodplain area and the barrier islands and the shoreline islands and see the different shapes of the eagle nests. Just a lot of variability there. but they look like big crow's nests, you know, up in the top of a very tall tree around here.
And with bald eagles on explore.org right now, we can watch one, two, at least 4 or 5 different nests. I actually kind of forget, so I apologize for that. The eagle audience out there is going to be commenting right now, and they're going to be saying, "Hey, you should know that." But then again, I apologize. But it's several nests, and it provides us really with a remarkable opportunity to get to know these animals a little bit as individuals, learn more about their life history as they come back to these nests each year. But that was kind of this opportunity is a very new phenomenon. Not only the technology, which we'll set aside for now, but again, getting back to the conservation history of eagles, there were, just 30, 40 years ago, just a few hundred nesting pairs of bald eagles left in the contiguous 48 states. So John and Amy, what did lead to the decline of bald eagles in North America during the 20th century?
Well, I actually think that maybe Dr. Sharp would be better off talking about that,
okay,
because his eagles are impacted by one of the main sources of their decline, DDT. It's a commonly used agricultural pesticide that causes eggshell thinning in a lot of birds, especially birds of prey and some piscivorous birds. So the banning of DDT in the United States was very helpful. We also stopped persecution of birds of prey legally through the Bald and Golden Eagle Act, passed, I believe, in the 50s. Migratory Bird Treaty Act passed earlier than that, and then eventually decided to go ahead and enforce those things. So DDT was the main cause, and again, Dr. Sharp can talk more about that. But also, we, I guess, developed more appreciation for birds of prey and put legal tools and enforcement in place to punish people who killed or persecuted them out of hand.
Right. So yeah, DDT was probably the major factor that drove their numbers down. But then there's lead poisoning from feeding on hunter killed or hunter injured animals. That's still one of the main issues with the eagles, is dying from lead poisoning, just feeding off of carcasses. As Amy mentioned, there was, the persecution of the birds for decades. There were bounties on eagles, misperceptions that they're going to come in and fly off with your cattle, and they're largely scavengers. So if you see them out in the field feeding on one of your dead animals, people were assuming that they had actually killed the animal, it's more likely that they found the dead animal and took advantage of it.
I think that is an aspect of their life history and ecology that maybe is less known. You look at a bird like a bald eagle sitting along water, you think of it diving for fish or chasing a duck or something like that, but you often don't think of them as scavengers, and that can make a big part of their diet. The place that I've had the opportunity to see bald eagles the most in Katmai National Park, I've never seen a bald eagle catch a live salmon. Every salmon that I've seen a bald eagle eat has been a salmon that's already been dead or killed by a bear or something else like that. So that's a big part of their ecology overall.
Yeah, right. Back to Mike, the probably a big part of that is the mechanism too. I mean, with DDT and other persistent organochlorine chemicals that were used primarily agrochemical industry and for pest management and vector control back when we were discovering and using new chemicals and thinking about the wonders of science, that we found out that went bad. But the more persistent organochlorine chemicals, toxaphene, DDT, others, gotten away from production of or use of chemicals like that. The ones that are used, at least in the ag industry today, it's a little bit, it's more beneficial because they're made to break down faster. So that bioaccumulation of that getting and magnifying up through the food chain, especially eagles that eat fish, and that those chemicals getting into that fish tissue with mostly fatty tissue, and then going up the food chain. That was a big part of the mechanism that led to the dropping numbers of the bald eagle and also other raptors and other species.
So we had
in
a
our
population. Go ahead, please.
I was going to say, we had sort of a unique problem with the DDT in Southern California, in that the major manufacturer was right across the channel on the mainland, and dumped thousands of tons into the marine environment over a 30-year period or so. And it's still in the system. We're still analyzing peregrine falcon eggs, and they have still pretty large amounts of DDE in them. So it's even though it was banned in '72, it's still a persistent problem in our area.
And the DDE being a degradation product that also, well, it's indication that that material is still around their natural, area that they live in. So
that is a remarkable fact to consider, since like you said, the DDT has not been manufactured in the United States since since the early 1970s. It was banned in 1972. Yet that the chemical, or the breakdown of it, that chemical is still in the ecosystem, still affecting these birds, still accumulating through the food chain. So our actions, of course, do have long-term consequences, and we're fortunate, though, that bald eagles have been able to recover in the United States. We see much larger numbers, even though they still face several threats, and we might kind of touch on those in just a little bit. But I wanted to ask all of you about the recovery of bald eagles. We mentioned before legislation that has greatly helped, like the Endangered Species Act, the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act. Government action also, has made a big difference in the recovery of eagles through the banning of DDT. But what other aspects have led to the recovery of this population? Because there are maybe over 10,000 nesting pairs of bald eagles in the United, or at least 10,000 bald eagles in the lower 48 states. A big part of that is that people's general all-around acceptance of the eagles, and I think that's one thing that the Raptor Resource Project has been working towards over the past several years as well. So, John and Amy, do you want to talk about your efforts and helping to educate people about eagles and their lives in the wild?
Sure. I guess I'm just going to kick off with a little history, and then John can take it from there. So we were actually founded in 1988 by Bob Anderson, who started us to breed the, at the time, highly endangered peregrine falcon for release. So Bob's real passion was peregrine falcons. However, he liked and was interested in every bird of prey. He was working with Neil Reddick on a movie called The American Bald Eagle. And once they were done filming, he said, "Hey, wouldn't it be fun to put this online?" And it was 2008, I think. And yeah, sure, that'd be great, Bob. So for the first year, we just sent, I think it was a picture every 2 minutes up to a website. I believe it was at Excel Energy. The second year, we went to Luther College and said, "Hey, you guys have probably the best internet in town. How about broadcasting this for us?" They said, "Sure." At the end of the year, though, they were happy to continue partnering with us, but it was also clear that it would be okay if we went somewhere else. Their mission was the college, not broadcasting an Eagle Cam. So we went to, at the time, Ustream, and sort of it exploded. We didn't expect that it would happen to the degree that it did. So that was a real experience for us. And I guess, John, you can take it from there.
Yeah. So, that the whole part of technology, I mean, that's really the interesting part about that. What just several folks can do with technology and a bald eagle cam, right? So I think the thing that is so interesting looking back on this, and just even the interest that's there and the following, and I'd call it a love affair with the bald eagle, is that they're so beautiful, they're so majestic, and people hadn't really seen them up close and personal like that. The majority of the American public hadn't seen that, and even the world for that matter.
Yeah.
So that first documentary came out, American Eagle, on PBS Nature, and part of that was this guy, Bob, who put this cam up in the nest and talking about that story, and that was about 2008. When the cam went viral in 2011, over 270 million people watching that cam in 1 year. It went to show that love affair basically that people have when they get connected with nature. It spawned a lot of eagle cams. I think you couldn't even count. There's got to be at least about 50 eagle cams out there across the country and the world right now. So it really just, the eagle cams kind of started springing up like weeds after that. So that connection and that public outreach, I think, is something that we're working to capitalize on, to raise awareness for researchers like what Peter's doing with bald eagles and what we do with garden falcons. That's a huge thing, because we're migrating into new generations here that did not get to live through that. I mean, I didn't get to see eagles or falcons when I was a young man, but I remember the first one that I saw. It was a pretty amazing experience. And so telling that story, the conservation success story of the Endangered Species Act and Rachel Carson and others that raised the warning flags of what was going on, and people and our scientists and our government doing something about it. Really, that educational component is so important.
And I also want to add real quickly, we're always warned not to anthropomorphize animals, and I know from personal experience in the field that it's a bad idea and you can get hurt doing that. Having said that, I think when people started watching the eagles, they were absolutely shocked to find that they had a life in some ways not too dissimilar to ours. They form families, they have young, they care for their young, they act in interesting ways. So I'm not saying that they think like us, but people looked into that nest and saw something of human life reflected in that nest, and that engaged them in a way that they didn't anticipate or expect, and that we didn't anticipate or expect.
And that's an important point, and I think we can see that in probably most animals. If we really take an opportunity to watch them closely, we see that they care for their offspring in different ways. Many of them have family lives that you're talking about. They struggle with hunger, and a lot of the same things that we do in our daily lives. Sometimes these animals, though, need a little bit of a nudge to recover on their own, and I think that's maybe something that Peter could talk about, because to get bald eagles restored to Channel Islands, it took a hands-on effort.
Yeah, and it was especially hard because of the local DDT problem. So on the Channel Islands, all the eagles had disappeared by the early 1960s, and we started reintroducing them in 1980 by building release towers, which are large cages up on stilts, getting young birds from nests, or the San Francisco Zoo's breeding colony of eagles, putting an 8-week-old bird up in these towers, feeding them for a month, and then opening the doors and releasing them onto the islands that way. We released, I think, about 33 eagles on Catalina Island between 1980 and 86, and then expanded up to Santa Cruz Island in 2002, releasing another 60+ eagles up on that island. And when we started getting our first breeding in the late 80s on Catalina, all the eggs were breaking in the nest, and that's when we found out that there was still a huge amount of DDT contamination in their eggs. So at that point, we actually had to go to an active manipulation of the nests, in which each spring we'd find the nests, wait for them to lay eggs, and then as soon as the clutch was done, we would go in, remove the eggs, place fake eggs in the nest for the adults to continue to incubate, and then try to hatch out the chicks in incubators and foster them back into the nest. So we were doing that through, let's see, on Catalina, we did that through 2008 because
Oh, wow.
there was just still a huge contamination problem. When we started the work up on Santa Cruz Island, we were planning not to do any of that manipulation. It was just to see if that island, which is further from our contamination source, whether those birds could breed on their own, and they did starting in 2006.
And today, do you have a good number on or estimate on the population in the Channel Islands?
Usually about 50 to 60 eagles. We have about 20 breeding pairs now scattered across 5 of the 8 Channel Islands. And then we have younger birds that come and go between the islands or to the mainland and back. We have transmitted birds that have left the islands, gone up to central British Columbia, and come back down to the islands. So they spend the first couple of years traveling up and down primarily the Pacific states, and then when they're about 4 years old, start trying to find a territory to set up.
And bald eagles right now are no longer listed as a threatened or endangered species in the United States. So we can look to the recovery efforts, the education efforts of these organizations, and seeing that it's been in government and seeing that it's been a great success. But eagles aren't necessarily free of threats in their lives. So we touched on a little bit of this earlier on, but I think it might be important to recap maybe what are the challenges that eagles face today in their lives. Peter, do you have any insight you want to lend to that question?
Today's problems, I think, one of the primary one is still lead poisoning from hunter killed or injured animals, even just leaving the gut piles behind in the field. That can be enough to kill an eagle. Electrocution is still a major problem, at least for our eagles that get to the mainland. Being hit by cars, because they are scavengers, they like to feed on roadkill, and oftentimes they don't get out of the way of approaching vehicles. So I think those are the 3 main hazards at least for the birds that we track.
And the general public might not be able to. Okay.
With the transmitted eagles that we've had over the last 7-8 years now, electrocution probably was the largest.
Electrocution has been the #1 source of death for the eagles that we've been tracking. There's 4 or 5, I don't remember, and then 1 car collision. I'm actually surprised we haven't seen more. And then, of course, the lead issue. We haven't had a lead poisoned eagle, but they certainly come into SOAR, Save Our Avian Resources, and the Raptor Center, probably for sure by the 10s and maybe by the 100s.
We see the prey, from hunting that does come up into the nest, and that, turkeys and deer parts and other hunted animals here from Midwest or even squirrels, it's like a 22 cartridge, with lead fragments in it is all it will take, a small fragment, less than the size of a BB. So we worry about that.
Yeah, we do.
But we also, Dave Pester and Amy and I and others here, we do take and help recover injured birds, and that seems to take them to rehab centers. And it is a huge issue, I think. And unfortunately, it looked like we had some progress a couple of years back in helping us move in that direction of helping remove lead, and a little bit of a step back here, but hopefully, our public desires and what we want to do as far as helping push that issue. And it's going to have to be, I think, at the local level, and people, hunters and others, stepping up and basically saying, we're gonna do this because it's the right thing to do for eagles, and it's the right thing to do for all of us who enjoy and eat this game that we hunt.
Exactly. Yeah. Lead-free ammo is available. So if you are a hunter, you value eagles, you value waterfowl, and just birds in general. Yeah, try to migrate over towards lead-free ammo. I think that can make a big difference in helping to protect eagles in 2019 and beyond. So that's, I think, one thing that people can do to help bald eagles. But John and Amy, what about eagles and other raptors? Are there other steps that people might be able to take to help these birds thrive where they live?
Well, when it comes to peregrine falcons, our nest box program actually was quite successful. Although I want, because we get called about this a lot, you have to have suitable habitat. You can't just put a nest box up anywhere. But you can make space for them in their lives. You can create habitat. Depending on the species, you might be able to put up a nest box as long as you're willing to invest the time into taking care of it and making sure that it's actually productive. Those come to the top of my head immediately.
Yeah, as far as eagles and peregrine falcons, a big part and really probably the reason that I'm involved with this organization and what I'm doing right now is landowners and conservation. So being a landowner where historically peregrine falcons had been, and eagles, there's a large eagle nest at the base of the Great Spirit Bluff Falcon Cam. That's our family property, but there's a large bald eagle nest right down underneath where the Top Gun, the peregrine falcon, manages and controls who it lets go through its territory. But the landowners and conservation of the areas where the birds nest and where they call home, and their hunting areas, that's a huge aspect of what the public can do. So promoting and helping keep areas that are used for roosts and migration and for nesting, I think, is probably the biggest thing that the public can do, for these type of raptors.
Clean air, clean water, and habitat.
And Peter, what tips do you have for people who want to watch bald eagles in the wild? I mean, that's an enjoyable experience. It's fun to watch them at their nests. It's fun to see them bringing food to their young back and forth, or to see them hunting or scavenging food. But how might people do that in an appropriate manner? Are there any tips that you can provide?
Well, generally for us, when we're observing a nest, we try to keep at least an 800-foot buffer. The birds, you start getting close to that, they start getting a little bit nervous. It depends on, the birds. Some birds, if they choose to build in a tree and down, then, there's no way to keep that buffer. But that was their choice to build there. But oftentimes it's better to watch from a vehicle if you can, because they just don't seem to recognize that as a threat. Sitting in there with a spotting scope in the window works well. Once you start, get out of the vehicle, that's when at least our birds start to get a little bit more nervous. Try not to be above them. I know in most places you're not actually above the nest, but here I might be watching a nest from 800 feet above it. But if you can stay below them, they feel a lot more safe that way. And just basically go on their behavior. If they start vocalizing or flying around, then you're too close and need to back off.
Giving birds space, I think, is probably the easiest thing to do. It's really fun to watch them, but yeah, just give them a little bit of room. I always carry binoculars with me when I'm outside. I think that's kind of one of the essential things in my naturalist toolkit that I always carry around, and it really has opened up a world of opportunity of wildlife watching, things that I wouldn't notice just with my overall poor eyesight. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be able to see like a bald eagle. It must be quite amazing, but I can get a little bit of that by carrying my binoculars around and watching them. And then just one last question for everybody before we conclude here. I wanted to ask you, and this is sort of a fun question, but do you have a favorite story about bald eagles? Maybe something that you observed them doing that was memorable. Maybe we can start with John and Amy, and then Peter, you can follow up.
I can start with that. I was referring to it back. I think it was a visit back to our property which is Mississippi River Valley Bluffland area. There's about a 600-foot relief there between the top of the bluff and the Mississippi River. But coming back for a break from college and was out on the bluff, kind of, enjoying the view and just the experience. And it was a little bit of a breezy afternoon. The sun was out, and all of a sudden, probably about 10 feet from me, because I was right up near the edge of the bluff, bald eagle soared right up next to me, and its head turned and looked at me. And it's kind of like made this connection that you'd have to say, it's like a spiritual experience of connecting with that raptor, and then it just kind of turned its head and soared off. Something very neat for me.
I have a hard time answering that question, I guess, simply. Several years ago, my mother-in-law, who's gone now, was at our house. We live out in the country in a big flat area. We have eagles maybe 2 miles away from us, but not on our property. And it was during fall migration, and 3 adult bald eagles flew into our yard, calling and kind of pursuing one another, harassing one another the way they will, not really seriously fighting. And she was absolutely thrilled. She was in her late 70s or early 80s at the time, and she had gone through the period where they had gone in decline. So for her to see 3 of them was just, to her, mind-blowing. And then my mom and I were in Clinton, Iowa, and again, this is years ago. We don't have them all over the place. And we saw a bald eagle with my grandma, who's been gone for years. And again, it was just kind of this thrilling shared experience. It was like, wow, this is amazing, And at the time, it was really amazing to see a bald eagle. So those, I guess, would be 2 memories that I have.
For me, it's probably just the fierceness of the adults when they're protecting their nest. Having to have gone in and removed eggs and fostered chicks, because they were mostly on rock pinnacles at the time. There's no branches to protect you from a dive bombing adult. So having a 14-pound eagle diving at you at 40 miles an hour, and you feel the wind from their wings as they go by, that's sort of nerve-wracking. And also, when I first started, we had a trio of bald eagles at the West End nest before the current pair that's out there. And just watching the interactions between 3 adults working on a nest, cooperatively incubating, feeding the chicks. It was 2 females and a male. The last year or 2, both females started laying eggs, so we'd have actually 2 nest cups or egg cups in a single nest. So just watching. At the time, that was a pretty rare thing to have trios. I think more have popped up as the population has grown, but I think that was probably one of the first known trios, and just watching the cooperation was pretty impressive.
Well, great stories, everyone. I'm glad you were able to take a few moments out of your day to share your insight with us. And, April is Earth Month. And, we're kicking it off here on Explore.org with Bald Eagle Week. And I think they're a fitting species to start Earth Month with, because of the success story that we've discussed today about how their population is declining to very, very low levels. And now they're no longer considered a threatened or endangered species in the United States. Even though there may be some continuing threats to their lives, we can, in a sense, kind of celebrate their overall recovery. It's a really great success story. And I would like to thank my special guest co-hosts with me today. So John Howe and Amy Reese from the Raptor Resource Institute, and Peter Sharp from the Institute for Wildlife Studies. If you want to visit their websites, please go ahead and do that. You can visit them at raptorresource.org or iws.org, respectively. A lot of great information about wildlife, especially birds, on their websites. You can learn a ton by browsing their websites and just get more information about their projects and the great work that they happen to do. And don't forget to, if you want to help these organizations, to purchase a Bald Eagle t-shirt through bonfire.com/Bald Eagle Week. This is a fundraiser, and all proceeds from those t-shirt sales will be matched by explore.org up to $1,000. So please help these organizations out with that. And don't forget also to watch the Bald Eagle cams on explore.org. You can watch these nests that we've been talking about, the Decorah nests in Iowa and the nests on in the Channel Islands, and see this continuing success of these really majestic species happening live right now. There's most, if not all, of the nests right now have young chicks in them that the parents are actively raising. So it's a really exciting time of the year to get to know these animals. So again, I'd like to thank my guests today. Thanks for joining me. My name is Mike Fitz, resident naturalist with explore.org, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.